I don't know if any of you all have ever heard a statement like this. I don't want to ask my students about suicide because I don't want to put the idea in their head. Yeah, that's a really common theme that we hear, right? We hear it from parents, we hear it from teachers, we hear it from school administrators. What we really want to emphasize is that it is safe and actually very protective to ask directly about suicide. I know that there's some new legislation that's rolled out, which impacts the way that school mental health professionals will navigate these conversations with students. But from my point of view, it is perfectly safe to ask about suicide. Perhaps you're the first and only person who's actually used the word suicide. And that's going to tell that youth or that person you're speaking with, this is a person I can talk to. This is a person who is going to show up for me, right? Simply asking that question conveys so many messages of support. Now, if I ask somebody, I'm going to put Robert on the spot. So if I asked, well, you're not thinking about suicide, are you? Robert, what's your impression of that question?
You want me to say no?
Yeah. So the way that we ask is really important, right? We want to make sure that through our asking, we're conveying compassion and empathy, even if you're internally freaking out, right? It is really scary and uncomfortable to enter into a conversation, especially with a youth, about suicide. And it is natural to have some feelings about that, to feel nervous, to feel angry, to feel like you want to protect them, right? But we want to make sure that we're talking with them in a way that is inviting them to share with us so that they don't isolate and pull away. So are you thinking about suicide or are you thinking about killing yourself are really the two recommended ways to ask. Because if I were to ask, are you thinking about harming yourself? If somebody said, yes, I'm thinking about harming myself, do we know if they're thinking about suicide? No, we know that they're thinking about hurting themselves. So if you're going to ask the harm question, just follow it up with a question about suicide. So sometimes people have some hesitancy around just asking the question outright. So you can sort of make a little runway for yourself, and which we give in this example. So I've noticed that you've been sleeping a lot in class, and your coach told me that you've been missing practice. Sometimes when people are struggling, they think about suicide. So it makes me wonder, are you thinking about suicide? Right? So what we did there is we pointed out some specific warning signs that we identified. And then we said, sometimes when people are struggling, they think about suicide. So that sort of shows like, I'm not alone in this. People have thought about this before. I'm not weird. I'm not scary, right? I'm just struggling. And then we ask directly, which conveys the message that you are the person to talk to.